Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and welcome to the Fantasy Cup. This is a 1500 combat power format where only Dragon, Steel, and Fairy type Pokemon are allowed. Normally, the Fantasy Cup is one of my favorite metas every time it's here in Go Battle League, and this rotation is no exception. I had a scorching start to the Fantasy Cup with a 5-0 first set and going 10-2 overall with a team built around Giratina Origin and Shadow Waterfall Empoleon. Giratina Origin is probably the most neutral Pokemon in this entire meta, and Empoleon really likes Waterfall in this meta as you get awesome fast move pressure into the Steel types. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, I'm going to be leading Giratina Origin into Doublade. Now Doublade is a Pokemon that I frequently called the Fraudmon, so I better make sure that I don't lose to it. The good news is Giratina does have a pacing advantage, and the Shadow Claws do so much to Doublade that they even have to respect an Ominous Wind. I put up a shield just to get Sacred Sword baited, and that is definitely not ideal. However, I get my redemption as I end up catching a Gyro Ball onto the Shadow Empoleon, where it's double resisted. My opponent answers with Galarian Stunfisk, but they didn't know that we have Waterfall. Waterfalls are deleting the Galarian Stunfisk. I get to launch a Hydro Cannon, and Stunfisk is forced to put up a shield. My opponent throws on pretty poor charge tech timing here as they throw when they reach the back-to-back Rock Slides. Rock Slide lands, does not take the knockout, and my opponent will get a farm down. However, I have set this up perfectly to where I can now send in Azumarill. Azumarill is incredibly strong in this meta when all shields are down. My opponent's going to be setting back in the Doublade, but I'm very comfortable absorbing the damage from Doublade and fully farming this down as well, because Doublade just doesn't hit very hard. Gyro Ball lands, Azumarill tanks it no problem, and I still have quite a lot of energy stored on Giratina. My opponent still has yet to reveal their final Pokemon, and they're not going to reveal it here as they send in Galarian Stunfisk. I save energy on the Azumarill, pivot into Giratina, take the knockout, get an Ominous Wind boost, but it's Altaria in the back. So even without the Ominous Wind boost, we still win because we have so much Azumarill energy. Ominous Wind lands onto Altaria, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. Hopping into game number 2, picking up a very tricky lead, Giratina Origin into Shadow Flygon. I safe switch into Empoleon just to learn that this is not Dragon Tail, this is a Mudshot Flygon. However, they've already lost half their Flygon, that's how hard hitting these Shadow Waterfalls are. My opponent grabs a shield advantage with a Twister Bait, sends in their own Shadow Waterfall Empoleon, and the good news for me is I actually have fast move pressure here. And even better, my opponent overfarms, playing to a CMP tie that they do not win. I have a truly atrocious IV Shadow Empoleon. I have 14 attack. I am always going to be winning that charge attack priority tie. My opponent undercharges, but I pivot out and snipe them down with the Giratina. Giratina should now be able to outpace the Flygon and make it to the Ominous Wind. Flygon is known for many things, but it is not known for its bulk, so I'm able to grab a shield advantage. And now that I got their final shield, I'm just going to let this go. My opponent is doubled up, and I'm confident I am not surviving a Shadow Twister. This game is going to come down to Azumarill in the zeros. And I've already seen their Empoleon, so hopefully I should be in a pretty good spot. They fire off the Scorching Sands. In the back is Shadow Magneton. Magneton can make a discharge, but discharge will not knock me out yet. And my Azumarill is not running Ice Beam. We're on Hydro Pump. Hydro Pump takes the knockout. We bubble down Flygon, and we get another win. We move to game number 3, picking up a pretty nice lead, Giratina Origin into Azumarill. Now on paper, a Dragon into a Fairy type, how is this a good lead? Well, Giratina actually does quite well here as long as shields are up. I get to overfarm massively, firing off the Shadow Ball. I would love to try and go for a catch as well, and we do get the catch and the Waterfall Sneak onto the Empoleon. My opponent baited with the Ice Beam, that's a double resisted catch, and now in comes Shadow Altaria. Altaria is a bit of a core breaker for this team, as because Empoleon is on Waterfall, I only win the zeros into Altaria, I do lose the 1s and the 2s, and obviously Giratina wouldn't be a big fan either. So I'm actually going to be investing a Protect Shield here into the Empoleon because the Waterfalls are actually adding up, and in a weird way, despite the fact that Waterfall is resisted, this is some of my best fast move pressure into this Mon. I'm going to farm up a ton of energy. My opponent actually banks a move on the Altaria and reveals their final Pokemon to be Corviknight. Corviknight shields up the Hydro Cannon. I should now be able to send in Azumarill, and unfortunately for my opponent, they just can't really do any damage here. Corviknight fires off the Air Cutter. That's really not going to cut it, and now I can just farm up closer and closer to the Hydro Pump. The only worry would be if my opponent's able to make a third Air Cutter, then their switch timer will be up. And they do make the Air Cutter. I cannot afford to have a Hydro Pump caught onto Altaria, so I'm just going to overfarm and watch for a catch. And there it is, in comes Shadow Altaria right on schedule. They have the Sky Attack loaded, but importantly, this will fail to take the knockout. Now I can send in Giratina, get the Shadow Claw down, and Giratina just has energy for days. I saved a bunch of energy from earlier. Back in comes Azumarill, but Azumarill's getting knocked out by the Shadow Ball. I even got to overfarm, so I have residual energy as well. Back in comes the Corviknight. Giratina makes it to yet another Shadow Ball. Giratina Origin, it's so strong in this meta, and it's such a perfect core pairing for the Shadow Waterfall Empoleon, and the win streak grows to 3. We move to the next match, picking up a pretty nice lead, Giratina into Empoleon. My opponent safe switches into Shadow Dragonite, and this is a big problem. I saw the typing, I assumed it was Altaria, so I ended up going Azumarill, but this is not an Altaria. This is a Shadow Thunder Punch Dragonite, and Dragonite can basically beat this entire team. My best answer would have been to stay in with the Giratina, fire off an Ominous Wind, and then probably look to Waterfall down with the Empoleon. But now, by sending in the Azumarill has a terrible matchup here. I'm a complete sitting duck. I send back in the Giratina because Giratina should be walling off the Dragonite, but I've already lost my entire Azumarill. I've lost almost my entire Giratina, and now I'm going to be forced to give back the shield advantage as well. So this game has really not gone according to plan. My opponent pivots into their Empoleon, but I have a Shadow Ball waiting for them. Shadow Ball is going to land. Now I can send in my own Empoleon, and my plan here is pretty simple. I'm going to go for the full Waterfall down. Normally, in an Empoleon mirror, you can't really farm down, but with Waterfall, you absolutely can. So now I exit with quite a lot of energy. And what does my opponent have in the back? I'm assuming it's going to be Double Dragon. Timer counts down. It's Goodra as their final Pokemon, and this is probably going to be a loss. Goodra's pacing to Thunder Punch is incredibly fast. I farm up. I just have to watch for a catch, and they don't get it. That is massive. My opponent did not get the catch, and now, because I got the Waterfall sneak there, farming down their final Mon, I think I can actually win this, and I can. My Shadow Empoleon, it has terrible IVs, but it hangs on, knocks out the Goodra with the Drill Peck, and somehow, despite getting destroyed by the Dragonite, we take the win. In this next match, I was in queue for so long that even though I'm post-legend rank, I ended up queuing a rank 17, which is just absurd. That's just how long I was sitting in queue, that it just, I guess, found someone for me who doesn't even have their elo yet. My opponent fires off a Hydro Cannon at the Giratina, presumably trying to cover for a catch. I go for the Shadow Ball, and I'm going to try and go for a catch onto my own Empoleon. Unfortunately, my opponent is just simply too patient. They hold the energy, fire off the correct move, which is Hydro Cannon, and now send in a Shadow Volt Switch Fortress. I don't have an amazing time to fire off this energy, so I just throw it as soon as I get it. Hydro Cannon lands, look at the damage, and unfortunately, I barely miss getting the farm down with Waterfall. But they just lost their entire fortress, basically. I'm going to send in Giratina. I could have thrown the energy, but I actually think the correct play is to go for the farm down and instead just shield up the Rock Tomb, because now I have quite a lot of energy to threaten the Empoleon when it hits the field. Shadow Ball into Empoleon will take the knockout. In the back, they have Togekiss, and this game should be a win. Togekiss will typically be on Aurasphere and Psyshock. If they're on Dazzling Gleam, this could get a little bit tricky, but thankfully, Psyshock, even though it's a pretty good move, it doesn't hit the hardest against the Azumarill because the Azumarill just has insane bulk. So even though my opponent is up energy, and even though I'm not running Ice Beam, I'm on Player Up Hydro Pump, I should still be in the driver's seat here because the Azumarill loves nothing more than scenarios where the opponent does not have 2 shields, because Azumarill can just simply outlast. Azumarill tanking Psyshock after Psyshock, getting ever closer to the game-winning Play Rough. Even if this doesn't knock out, I can switch and snipe it with the Giratina. Play Rough does not take the knockout, but the Shadow Claw after will take the win. Hopping into the next match, sending Giratina into Shadow Garchomp. Now this one surely has to be Dragon Tail. I stay in to check the fast move. It is Dragon Tail, and now I'm going to safe switch into the Shadow Empoleon. Even though I know this is a Sand Tomb, this is Shadow on Shadow. That would do way too much damage. My opponent sends in Aegislash. Aegislash is eligible for this meta, and it's always a very scary Pokemon to go up against. But Waterfall Empoleon is substantially better into Aegislash than the regular Empoleon, because Waterfall Empoleon just hits incredibly hard. My opponent's gonna have to switch to Blade form here. I'll put up the shield, throw one Waterfall, and then I'll be at the back-to-back Hydros. So I fire off the Hydro Cannon. Unfortunately, the game ends up over-tapping me there. But the good news is, if they shield, I have the back-to-back Hydros, so I will be able to get both shields back. Well, I should have been able to, but unfortunately, when I try and click the Hydro Cannon button, it just does not respond, and they were in shield form at the time, so I should always win that charge attack priority tie, but unfortunately, I just lose an entire charge attack for no reason. I send in Giratina, they respond with a Hard Lock into a Sand Slash, and I'm able to get a Catch and Sneak onto Azumarill. So we're down an entire charge attack. We should have been able to pressure that final shield away, but I'm not going to give up yet. We have yet to lose with this team, and I do not want to change that here. They're going to fire off the Drill Run, going for the correct charge stack. I'm going to farm up a ton of energy and then try and go for the Play Rough. My opponent actually ends up waiting a turn here to CMP time me, a pretty interesting play as they do go for the Ice Punch. So they just wanted to trap me into throwing this move. Play Rough is going to land, barely missing the knockout. In comes Garchomp, and the game comes down to this. I have a Charge Attack loaded. Do I go for the Snipe? I decide to stay in because I knew my opponent would predict the Snipe. I just had a feeling. So I stay on the field. They throw the Twister at the Azumarill, predicting the Giratina switch in. And by not falling for an attempt at a combo play, we're now going to win this game. We lost an entire Hydro Cannon. It didn't matter. They get knocked out. Aegislash gets farmed down. And my opponent will concede the match. Hopping into the next game, Giratina into Shadow Altaria. Now this is a pretty negative lead. I throw one Shadow Claw just to store a little bit of energy for later, and then save switch into the Shadow Empoleon. Now in the moment, I wasn't really thinking about the fact that they were the Shadow Altaria, which means if they go for the Flamethrower, it almost picks up a one-hit knockout. So that is really not ideal. I do end up reading the fact that they would catch on Empoleon, and I'm able to throw the correct charge attack, but man, I probably should have shielded that. Now I get to send in the Giratina, but I really can't farm up as much as I'd like because the Empoleon is pretty close to a second Hydro Cannon. Drill Peck is going to connect. I throw the Ominous Wind right before they're able to get Drill Peck number 2, but that Altaria still feels like it's going to be a pretty significant problem. In comes Altaria, I send in Azumarill, they stay in, bank a ton of energy, and the final Pokemon is revealed to be Aegislash. So honestly, I'm in quite a lot of trouble here. If I had shielded the Shadow Empoleon, I think I would have been in a significantly better spot. Just because Empoleon with Waterfall was very strong into their team. But unfortunately, I did not. And now, I could actually be in quite a bit of trouble. Aegislash will fire off the Shadow Ball as it goes for the form change. The good news here is now that they're in Blade form, I get to do way more bubble damage. The bad news is, they get way more energy generation courtesy of getting to use Psycho Cut instead of charging. I fire off the Play Rough bait just to force them back into the shield form, and even though they're in this bulky shield form, I decide to go for the Play Rough. I just wanted to get a little bit of damage onto the Aegislash, knowing that if I could get them low, maybe I could snipe them down later with the Giratina. They fire off energy, I put up the shield, I'm going to switch into Giratina to go for the snipe, but my opponent actually had the back-to-back. I let them stay in the sword form for too long earlier, they Shadow Ball, take the knockout, and now back in comes the Shadow Altaria. The game's not over yet, however. If I'm able to make it to a second player up before they're able to get 3 Sky Attacks, then I should be in an okay spot to win this game. However, it's at this moment I remember that they stayed in for a while before revealing the Aegislash. They banked a ton of energy, and unfortunately for me, I'm just going to get outpaced here on Azumarill. So this is going to be the first loss of the team. I really felt like there was some ways that I could have played this game better, but unfortunately, I did not. Shadow Altaria up energy was so incredibly strong, and the Aegislash was a nightmare to deal with. We move to the next match, leading Giratina into Shadow Excadrill, some pretty cool spice from my opponent. They save switch into Goodra, and this is where things could get a little bit tricky. Because my best Goodra answer is the Giratina. But if they end up putting up a lot of shields, the Dragon Breaths do enough damage to Giratina that they can actually farm me into a range where the resisted charge attacks could actually threaten a knockout. They fire off Aqua Tail, Giratina survives, I reach for the Shadow Ball, but there's another Aqua Tail locked and loaded to deny that energy. I'm just going to take the shield advantage. I think that's my best course of action, because it's not like an Excadrill can really do a lot into a Shadow Empoleon plus Azumarill backline. So Goodra goes for the Thunder Punch, I fire off the Hydro Cannon instantly. Drill Peck would do more, but either move will knock out, and I wanted to cover for a catch onto the Exca. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon is a Shadow Altaria, and honestly it feels like things are looking pretty good for me. I send in a Azumarill, they respond with the Excadrill, they're actually on Mud Slap to my surprise, but look at these bubbles. I don't think I've ever seen Bubble hit that hard before. Azumarill just shredding through this Exca. Excadrill does get the Azumarill very, very low, but I'm not low enough that they'll be able to Dragon Breath down, and that's what they would need to win this game. My opponent will fire off the last second Sky Attack, but it's just too little too late. I have the Play Rough loaded. Play Rough will not take the knockout here, even though it is super effective. Azumarill just doesn't hit very hard. However, I have a move stored on the Empoleon. So we land the Play Rough, go for the combination play with the Empoleon. Unfortunately for my opponent, Exca just really could not do a lot into my backline. Hopping to the final match, Giratina into Fortress. No matter the fast move on Fortress, this is a very good lead. My opponent is on Volt Switch and they're staying in. So my priority now is just to get damage on Volt Switch Fortress because it's very, very strong into my backline. Shadow Bolt does connect, that's big damage, and I'm more than happy to let this go. Now I can threaten knockouts with the Ominous Wind. My opponent pivots, they send in Azumarill, and I'm just going to stay in, bank a massive amount of energy, and then bring in my own Azumarill. The most effective wall for an Azumarill up energy is your own Azumarill, because now I don't even really need switch advantage. But as it turns out, my opponent is not on Play Rough. They're on Ice Beam and Hydro Pump, and unfortunately the Ice Beam Hydro Pump moveset where it falls flat is in the Azumarill mirror. Because I have Play Rough, I can hit for neutral damage. My opponent is stuck throwing resisted Hydro Pumps, and even though Hydro Pump is a pretty strong move, resisted in an Azumarill mirror, it's really not going to do much. My opponent does make a very nice catch onto the Fortress, but I have a plan for this. I go for the undercharge, leaving it in 2 bubble range, meaning I only take 1 Volt Switch, and I get 2 bubbles worth of energy. So, 22 energy in exchange for 1 Volt Switch of damage, definitely a pretty nice trade for me. Back in comes the Azumarill. I'm able to land the Play Rough. They're not going to bubble down. They're forced to throw energy, and then I should be able to close out the game with the Empoleon and all that energy that I have on Giratina. So I send in Empoleon. In the back is Turtonator. Turtonator's Incinerates are shredding through the Empoleon, but I actually have fast move pressure here. My Waterfalls are adding up. And these Waterfalls have already put them in a range where Shadow Ball can knock out. Normally, Shadow Ball doesn't really come close to knocking out, but thanks to that Waterfall pressure from the Empoleon, this is a very straightforward game. I put up the shield as my opponent reveals they are on Dragon Claw plus Overheat, but I can just throw 2 Shadow Claws, go for the Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is going to be taking the knockout on a Turtonator, and that is a good game. All in all, I would call this a very successful day 1 of the Fantasy Cup. Found a team that felt like it cut through the meta like a scythe. I got to use Shadow Waterfall Empoleon, which is a Pokemon that I've wanted to use for quite a while this season, but felt like it didn't really have a place in the Open Great League meta. It felt like generally Metal Claw just overperformed, but in a meta like this, where there's not really a lot of water resists, Waterfall Empoleon felt very strong. I love the fact that it felt substantially stronger into Corviknight counter swaps because the Shadow Waterfalls just shredded through them. If you're ever going to catch onto Empoleon, your opponent doesn't know what fast move you have, like in the game 1 where they sent in a Stunfisk just to get deleted by Waterfalls. So I really liked Shadow Waterfall Empoleon. Now, you can definitely run a high rank one. My only Shadow Empoleon is that really bad IV one, so you don't have to run an IV as bad as me. You probably shouldn't. You should probably run a better IV than that, but if you're one of the trainers lucky enough to have a Great League Giratina Origin, this team is incredibly strong. Now, a lot of people will ask in comments, like, Henry, I don't have a Giratina Origin, what can I run? I think you would probably use a Shadow Dragonite with Thunder Punch and Superpower in place of Giratina. Now, Dragonite, it's definitely more offensive than Giratina, where I think Giratina is just a very neutral presence, but if you truly don't have one, that would probably be the best replacement. As far as Shadow Waterfall Empoleon and Azumarill, to me those feel pretty irreplaceable, as both of them are just very strong, staple meta picks in this Fantasy Cup meta. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated, so thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.